Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Las Brisas Black Honey Processed Salvador from Nomad. And there's the bag right there. And Nomad, based out of Barcelona, Spain. And this coffee right here was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video as part of the Right Roast's February subscription box, where it did finish 4th place out of 4 coffees on that day. And going into that video, Nomad is actually the coffee roaster we had the most familiarity with, having reviewed 2 full bags of their coffee within the past couple of months. And if you watched either of those 2 reviews, then you noticed that we weren't necessarily overly impressed with either of those 2 coffees, as the Rwanda was suffering from the potato defect and the Ethiopia just came out a little bit more delicate and tame than I think I was expecting from Nomad. So it's safe to say I'm a pretty persistent person, and seeing Nomad as part of the Right Roast's February subscription set was certainly a huge selling point to me, as I really want to figure Nomad out. And regardless of how I feel about this coffee, there will be at least one more review, as I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get my hands on one of their higher end offerings here in the near future. So this will just kind of give me more of an impression of them going into that review. This right here is day 28 of this coffee. And of course, the disclaimer's out of the way, so these are 50-gram sample bags of coffee, and as a result, much shorter reviews. And the recipe we went with for this one was the one that the Right Roast has. I still think it's great that they have those, and it is a 15-to-1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 94 degrees Celsius. Like this one more through the V60, so a medium fine grind. And the roast profile is a European light for Nomad. So with those out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 18, which was that blind taste test rankings day, and you probably noticed it was relatively tame based off of that first impression, and Nomad hasn't performed well in those blind taste test videos, and there's just something about the slight finish that comes from this cup of coffee, as it felt like a very slight and light chocolate in general, but I described it as a Nomad-like finish. And the first time I'd had that Rwanda, it was slightly sour, and I feel like that's the exact same experience I was getting, and it was kind of a weird process of elimination that I was able to pick out that coffee, because I'm like, this tastes a little like that Rwanda, so I'm like, this probably is the Nomad coffee, and it was the Nomad coffee. And when I saw that I got that right, I'm like, I think just Nomad has a very specific taste to certain coffees of theirs. So as a result, it wasn't necessarily the best first impression, but I said, hey, we can make some adjustments on this, and it'll certainly improve from this point on. Day 20, better through the Chemex, and maybe looking back on it, it's a little better through the Chemex, and I'll kind of explain why towards the end, but it has a slight bit more robust chocolate sweetness. And the biggest sticking point to me for Nomad's coffees up to this point has been that they were a little too tame for me. They lacked the type of sweetness that I really tend to enjoy from so many of their coffees, from so many coffees in general. But yeah, it had this kind of dark berry herbal taste to it. There was plenty of complexity in the cup. I believe the flavor notes they have listed on here, some sort of chocolate, blueberry, and fig. And I've said before, I don't really know the way figs taste, but I kind of imagine that that's a slightly herbal taste that I'm getting from this cup of coffee. But those berries are definitely there, and they are dark berries, but they're not necessarily specifically honed in on that blueberry that I'm used to from so many natural processed Ethiopias. Just a little different berry in general. But we'll continue with day 25, and it was the most intense day of the coffee to this point. And I think that that's what the V60 does, is it really intensifies this cup of coffee. And I'm not necessarily sure I really enjoy that much, because it just kind of gave it a very rich, deep chocolate berry to it. It was a little boozy, it was a little fermenty, and the boozy berry fermenty components of coffee are my least favorite thing in coffee as of this moment, because they've been too much, they've been overwhelming. And I wouldn't say that this cup of coffee was necessarily overwhelming, it was just pretty heavy in 2 flavors that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of in general. So credit for the cup of coffee, being a lot more vibrant than the previous ones had been, but at the same time it was vibrant in a sense that I didn't particularly enjoy. So cup remained ever herbal, and there was a bit of a smoky dark chocolate base to the cup of coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And this is another one of those really weird tasting wheels. Wow, I'm gonna have a fun time going through this and saying if I agree with it. All right. A bunch of level 4s, let's run through those real quick. The finish, level 4, especially through the V60, I said that it was a much more vibrant cup of coffee and lasting cup of coffee. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Body, level 4, wow, through the V60. Okay, that would make a lot of sense, because as I'm drinking it here through the Chemex, it still has quite a fair bit of body. Berry fruit, level 4, yeah, I would say that and the chocolate are the 2 most intense flavors from this cup of coffee. I'm experiencing that again today. I think I have the spice and the savoriness pretty high, because as mentioned, it just does have this pretty distinct herbal taste to it as well. So I can agree with all of those being at a level 3. Pretty acidic. The sweetest cup of Nomad coffee I've had, that's for sure, so it definitely justifies that level 3, but even then, I don't feel comfortable pushing it up all the way to a level 4. not the cleanest. And I know I was being a little generous. I can be a little generous with Nomad's tasting wheels from time to time. So I think I'm being a little generous putting that all the way up at a 3 because especially through the V60, it is a little too fermenty for me. And I could justify it too, but three's fine. Smokiness, it's a lot smokier than I think I was expecting. And bitter, it's a little more bitter too than I think I was expecting as well. Kind of a bitter dark berry. Yeah, I actually really agree with this tasting wheel, which is kind of funny because I couldn't convince myself looking at it, but when I'm kind of talking myself through it, I'm like, this is actually the way the coffee was coming out for me. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I swear I have no sort of vendetta or grudge against Nomad, as it's kind of over 3 at this point, as I didn't necessarily enjoy this one either. It was my least favorite of the 4 coffees from the Right Roast February subscription set. But it's the best Nomad coffee I've had to this point. I think just having the increased sweetness was a huge selling point to me, but the biggest detractor from this coffee was I just didn't particularly like the flavor of it. So I think we're moving in the right direction, that as long as you're kind of hitting certain marks in terms of just overall flavor and vibrancy, then we're getting there. But at the same time, it needs to be maybe skewed in a direction that's a lot more my flavor profile. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, it's tricky. We still have the lighter profile that Nomad is, while at the same time you have a very strong abundance of chocolate and berries, and I think that can lend itself to a specific type. I think maybe thinking those Central American coffees that have more robust characteristics to them, this is pretty vibrant in those robust characteristics, so that could be a pretty nice fit for somebody that does tend to like more chocolatey and even more berry-like cups of coffee. So that's probably the best I can suggest for somebody when it comes to this coffee. I think for the most part, this is the best way I can leave this review as well. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from Nomad, would still love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Las Brisas Black Honey Process El Salvador from Nomad. Thank you for watching.